To help us unpack the case and the charges against Zuma and Thales, I'm joined now by legal journalist at News24 Karyn Maughn and Deal whistleblower and Open Secrets Director Hennie van Vuuren to be a part of this conversation tonight on Twitter at Newzroom405. You can send us your thoughts or send us a WhatsApp message with questions and comments to 072-110-5584. Is President Jacob Zuma's corruption trial nothing more than an attempt to attack the ANC's liberation struggle culture? You tell me what your thoughts are. President saying these were donations given to him with no expectation. What is your thinking around it, and what was your expectation would be in terms of the plea by the former president? Karyn, good evening, and thank you for your time. And Hennie, thank you for joining us tonight as well. So Karyn, I mean, it goes without saying, if President Jacob Zuma says he doesn't know where these charges come from, naturally Thales would also say, well, we don't know where these charges come from, so there's no case here.
Well, I mean, Thales gave a far more detailed plea explanation than the former president did. Jacob Zuma has given a number of different, assertions in regard to his defense in the past, not least of all in his special plea in which he claims that the money he received were innocent donation and benefits, a manifestation of the liberation culture of the ANC, which sought to support comrades who were not, able to financially look after themselves. But of course, the state's level of evidence and the conviction of Shabir Shaik, which obviously has no bearing on Jacob Zuma's trial, suggests very strongly that there was, in the case of Shaik, a very sustained pattern of now 791 payments and benefits that were given to Jacob Zuma over the period of a decade to ensure, essentially, the state avers that he was kept on a corrupt retainer. And the state has asserted in documents in the Constitutional Court, I think around 2008, 2009, that while it showed 4 instances where Zuma had done favors for Shaik in the Shaik case, when it presents this case in the court this year, it will show 28 such instances. So it says there's simply, there is sustained evidence that Jacob Zuma not only took these benefits, but he also lied about them to Parliament. He didn't disclose these so-called innocent donations to Parliament. He didn't disclose them to Cabinet, and he certainly didn't disclose them to SARS, which is why the NPA is pursuing him for tax evasion. Thales is, of course, saying that there was no bribe agreement, that there was the money that was given to Shaik was in wholly out of, sync with any kind of bribe agreement. And they're very much trying to distance themselves from any knowledge of the so-called corrupt relationship between Shaik and Zuma.
So talk to me then a little bit more about the revelations on the charge sheet that certainly seem to place now former President Jacob Zuma as the deputy president to former President Thabo Mdluli. Even at that time, it seems the donations continued.
Well, yeah, it is the state's case that, remember in the Shaik matter, I think it was in the region of over 800,000 Rand, in closer to 900,000 Rand benefits over a decade-long period. Everything from, school fees to car repairs, Christmas groceries, etc. And when the state presented its indictment against Zuma, which is obviously different to the Shaik case because Shaik was not charged with racketeering, he was not charged with being part of an organized criminal corrupt enterprise. The state said that the search and seizure operations conducted by the Scorpions, subsequent to Zuma being charged, revealed that these payments had actually accelerated and continued, not accelerated, but had continued when Shaik was actually on trial for corrupting Jacob Zuma. And the amount that Zuma is now on trial for is around 4 million Rand. I mean, given the level of alleged state capture looting that we've heard about with contracts, according to Shadow World investigations linked to the Guptas, provided by the state, now amounting to 49 billion rand, I think most people would say, well, 4 million rand, what does it mean in the greater scheme of things? But this case is really about the ANC's original sin, the arms deal, and the way in which the failure to seek accountability properly at the time for what seems to be manifest evidence of corruption has invariably set the stage for ongoing and continuously economically, socially damaging corruption that continues to haunt us even today.
Now, Hennie, of course, you describe in your book, A Tale of Profit, this relationship between French arms company Thomson CSF and the apartheid government, and why you think they wouldn't even think twice or even blink to continue that relationship with a democratic government. Just tie the two for us, and what constitutes this relationship, and how does it manifest itself in a new dispensation of a democratically elected government?
Thabo, thanks very much. I think our focus on Jacob Zuma as former president of the country is a correct one. Obviously, as a politician that many South Africans voted to hold that position for more than one term. But importantly, of course, is the role of corporations in this type of bribery and corruption. And I think that, we really have to, as we keep on arguing, see the Thales as front and center to the allegations of corruption, given the manner in which the corporation has conducted itself, not only in South Africa, but globally. Thales, like many other big arms companies, is linked to allegations of corruption and bribery in other jurisdictions. It's part state-owned in France, and so very well tied into the establishment interests in France. And, through our research and the work of many others, we were again able to shine a light on the fact that Thales, in its predecessor firm, which was Thomson CSF, in the 1970s and 1980s, had worked very actively with the apartheid regime in the development of weapons, for example, of missile systems. This was P.W. Botha would travel to France to be able to see some of those prototypes being put into action, to give you a flavor of what was happening. And that, of course, was often in violation of international sanctions, and very clearly with a deep understanding by Thales' predecessor company of the crime of apartheid, which was a crime against humanity, and what was happening in South Africa. And that's important for us, I think, to understand the nature of the corporation, the manner in which it's conducted itself criminally, and the extent to which it has historically and continues, like many big arms companies, similar to British Aerospace in Britain, and I think there are other companies in Germany we can speak of, that often rely on their own states to protect them. The intelligence services in the states, the politicians. I could imagine there was in the past, certainly we've heard from former Thales representatives, pressure put by former French heads of state on South African presidents, including former President Thabo Mdluli, to simply drop this thing, make it go away, because Thales is too important to the French economy and too important to the interests of, again, a small coterie of French elite interests. So I think important to recognize the power and the influence, but also the track record of a company that has deep roots of complicity with human rights abuse and corruption.
Karyn, there are, of course, only 2 convictions so far that could have been linked somewhat to the arms deal. And just track for us those convictions, and do they in any way link up to the former president Jacob Zuma in terms of the relationships of those who were found guilty of fraud?
Well, obviously, the big conviction was of Shibna Sheikh in 2005 for corrupting former President Jacob Zuma when he was the deputy president, and then formerly the tourism MEC in KZN, and obviously the conviction of Tony Ngeni. But as we've seen, one of the pivotal issues that has actually come out again in Open Secret's efforts to demand accountability from the 2 judges who presided over the Soweto Commission into the arms deal. There is substantial evidence of a number of other people who benefited from the arms deal, where prosecuting authorities in Britain, in Sweden, in Germany, and other countries were offering the South Africans evidence of people like Chippy Sheikh, Fanat Hlongwane, and others having received, Johan Bredenkamp having received, allegedly substantial bribes in order to facilitate the arms deal by a number of different international manufacturers. So, the fact that we had the Soretti Commission, find that there was simply no evidence of corruption was simply astounding. And I think, as this process unfolds, as the Zuma trial unfolds, the JSC, the Judicial Service Commission, is dealing with an inquiry on the 4th of June in the coming days as to those judges' conduct in the case, and also dealing with allegations which are very substantively put by Shadow World, that they simply ignored entire swathes of evidence and information demonstrating very palpably that the deal was rotten to its core.
All right, let's take a break. When we continue with our legal journalist at News24 Karyn Maughn, as well as arms deal whistleblower and open secrets director Hennie van Vuuren, we'll unpack a little bit more at what are the new developments, particularly around this trial, legal representation, but also whether or not former President Jacob Zuma is directly dealing with the trial right now, or more than he is attacking the lead prosecutor on this particular matter. But let's get your views tonight. The president saying that the corruption trial is nothing more than an attempt to attack the ANC's liberation struggle culture. What are your views? At Newzroom 405 072 110 5584. The Newsfeed Late Night continues next. Back with you in conversation tonight on the Newsfeed Late Night. Legal journalist at News24 Karyn Maughn, as well as arms deal whistleblower and open secrets director Hennie van Vuuren with us tonight, getting your views on Twitter as well as on WhatsApp 072 110 5584. In a moment, we'll also hear from the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal on their support for former President Jacob Zuma. Let's talk, Hennie, about why these donations are controversial.
Well, I think it's as much about the crime of corruption as the cover-up, Thabo, and I think that's what Karyn was speaking about. When we look at a history and a legacy of cover-up, I think we would argue certainly in the conduct, as we spoke about the Soretti Commission, but a number of instances where there was an attempt by our public institutions to investigate corruption in the arms deal, and there was always pushback. The political pushback, but certainly pushback that the court benefited the corporations as well. In this particular instance, of course, the reason for providing those funds to President Zuma, the state has argued, and I think there seems to be good reason to suggest that was the case, was for Thales to make sure that they had a person who was ascendant in their power. They might have been an MEC at that stage in KwaZulu-Natal, but it was very clear that Jacob Zuma was no ordinary politician. He was a person who was destined for greater things, and as we would then eventually see, become deputy president of the country and finally president. And this is the kind of long game that many corporations who are involved in corruption play, is to identify politicians who you are sure are going to help you when you're in a tough spot. And Thales recognized right from the early stages that they would need somebody like that. They had complications because they had people like Richard Young, who was a arms dealer himself, who did not win a contract, and it was part of the contract which Thales had received. And he, of course, started to provide evidence and created a platform for disseminating some of that information of what he alleged was corruption. And so, therefore, people like Jacob Zuma would become very important. Now, the amount of money that they're alleged to pay him is not great, as Karyn has pointed out, in comparison with what we look at. The amounts we have identified in terms of state capture. But of course, it didn't take very much to be able to buy the kind of influence that Thales would need. And that served them very well, because ultimately what happened was the destruction of some of the country's most important public institutions, and of course the NPA, and the disbandment of the Scorpions, which happened in almost the blink of a political eye, where politicians came out in support of the disbandment of the Scorpions, precisely because they were looking at investigating the arms deal and had made headway and were about to move not only on Thales, but they were about to move on if you like, the bigger fish, which was British Aerospace with the big German companies, the Italian companies, the Swedish companies, Saab, and that would touch on interests in countries around the world. So it was really important that those institutions were shut down. Yeah. And of course, to have a powerful politician like Jacob Zuma who can spearhead that approach, a person who knows how to work the back channels, isn't afraid to do so, and operates in the shadows with great ease, he in fact was the perfect front man, I think, if one likes to use that description for an operation like this.
So Hennie, you just mentioned it now, but talk to us about what the BAE system inquiry actually revealed, and why did those multinationals quickly plead guilty?
Well, I think the question about the decision by those multinationals to plead, I'm not sure if they've never pled guilty in South Africa because they've never been charged. And I think that's part of what has happened over the last years, is Jacob Zuma, in disabling those institutions, has not only managed to ensure that he is not prosecuted, but he's able to create this argument, this mystique that I'm the only one that they want to go after. Well, effectively, Jacob Zuma and Thales should be the first in a domino chain of corporations and individuals that need to be prosecuted. And of course, BAE, British Aerospace, the big British arms company, has been linked to corruption in many countries in a way that Thales has, but probably even to a greater extent. And not only that, but they were using middlemen, and Fana Hlongwane is one of those people, himself, of course, linked to being a fixer within state capture period as well. And these are men who made literally hundreds of millions of rands out of that process, and became incredibly wealthy of acting as political fixers in a process of ensuring that South Africa bought trainer and fighter jets that the country certainly didn't need or couldn't afford at the time. But importantly, they erred on the side of BAE, and BAE had their people in place. And while the British have investigated BAE for this, the only thing that we've seen, even close to justice, was a process that took place in the United States more than 10 years ago now, where BAE did admit that they had paid bribes in various jurisdictions, Tanzania, South Africa, and one or two others, and they paid a bribe in the United States. It's a pretty, if you like, normal procedure where big corporations pay bribes and then are no further prosecutions for that. But we haven't seen any substantive justice in South Africa. We certainly haven't seen the executives from BAE, their middlemen, as I pointed out, Fana Hlongwane is one. There are a range of other people that would be pulled into that dragnet, including the former Minister of Defense, Simpiwe Nyanda, amongst others, based on investigations that we and others have undertaken. And very clearly, it would touch on interests like Thales that are at the very heart of the British establishment. And I'm sure that's one of the reasons why London, too, would like to see this case go away. So, Thabo, maybe the point to make is, while President Zuma makes this argument that the CIA and all these forces are behind the prosecutions, in fact, his project of ensuring that there is no justice is a project that benefits precisely these reactionary interests in the Western capitals of the world, whether this is Paris or Berlin, and arguably Washington, and certainly London as well.
Karyn, is former President Jacob Zuma gearing up to tackle the corruption trial itself more than he is tackling Billy Downer to recuse himself?
Well, the special